Black woman caught her billionaire husband cheating on New Year's Eve. Days later, something shocking happened. A black woman catches her billionaire husband cheating at a lavish New Year's Eve party and walks away in front of cameras, guests, and the whole world. By morning, the tabloids explode. Everyone thinks it's just another rich man scandal. But days later, a chilling call changes everything. The woman her husband cheated with has vanished, and he was the last person seen with her. As she searches for answers, hidden accounts, secret identities, and erased people begin to surface. Then the nightmare turns real, when the evidence suddenly points at her. Is she being framed to protect a powerful man's secrets? And can she uncover the truth before she loses not just her marriage, but her freedom? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the grand ballroom of the Cross Tower, where hundreds of New York's elite mingled in their finest attire. Nia Carter smoothed her emerald silk gown, a gesture that had become almost reflexive throughout the evening. The dress had been Julian's choice, like most things in their life together. "You're fidgeting again, darling." Julian's breath tickled her ear as he appeared beside her, champagne flute in hand. His tailored tuxedo fit perfectly, as always. Everything about Julian was perfect on the surface. "Sorry," Nia whispered, forcing her hands to her sides. "There are just so many cameras tonight." Julian's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's the point. The Cross Foundation's New Year's Gala is our biggest publicity event of the year." Nia nodded, watching as another photographer captured images of wealthy donors posing near the ice sculpture. She remembered a time when such events excited her, when she believed in the Foundation's mission of helping underprivileged communities. Now, 3 years into her marriage, something felt hollow about it all. The ballroom buzzed with conversation and laughter. Women dripped in diamonds, while men in $1,000 shoes discussed market predictions for the coming year. A server passed by with caviar, and Nia's stomach turned. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off tonight. "Mrs. Cross." A society reporter approached, notepad in hand. "You look stunning. Tell us about the Foundation's plans for the new year." Nia recited the practiced lines about upcoming initiatives and donor partnerships, just as Julian had coached her. Her grandmother had always said that truth sits in your bones, and these words felt like borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. The first boom of fireworks made her jump. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, colors burst against the night sky over Central Park. Julian touched her elbow. "Excuse me for a moment, darling. Need to check on something before midnight." Nia watched him weave through the crowd toward the private lounges. Something in his hurried stride made her pulse quicken. Without thinking, she followed, maintaining enough distance not to be noticed. The hallway leading to the executive lounges was quieter, the sounds of the party muffled by thick carpet and wood-paneled walls. Julian disappeared through a door at the end. Nia hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. The countdown began in the ballroom behind her. 10, 9, 8. She turned the handle slowly, easing the door open just enough to peek inside. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp. 7, 6, 5. Julian stood by the window, his arms wrapped around a woman Nia had never seen before. She was young, maybe 25, with long blonde hair that cascaded down her back. Their lips met in a passionate kiss. 4, 3. Nia's chest constricted. The room seemed to tilt sideways as she gripped the doorframe for support. Her wedding ring felt like it was burning against her skin. 2, 1. The crowd in the ballroom erupted in cheers of "Happy New Year!" as Nia stood frozen, watching her marriage shatter like a champagne glass dropped on marble. Fireworks continued to explode outside, their colourful light filtering through the window and casting strange shadows across Julian's betrayal. The young woman giggled, running her fingers through Julian's hair, the same way Nia used to do. "Happy New Year, baby," she whispered, loud enough for Nia to hear. Nia couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The perfect image she'd maintained as Julian Cross's wife, the carefully curated photos, the rehearsed interviews, the charity appearances, all of it crumbled in this single moment. Every doubt she'd pushed aside, every warning sign she'd ignored, every uncomfortable feeling she'd dismissed came rushing back with devastating clarity. The sounds of celebration continued to echo through the walls, a jarring contrast to the silent death of her marriage happening in this dark corner of the building. Another firework burst outside, illuminating the room in red and gold, and for a brief moment, Nia caught Julian's reflection in the window glass. His face showed no trace of guilt or shame, only annoyance at the interruption when he finally noticed the open door. Nia closed the door silently, her fingers trembling against the polished wood. The celebration swirled around her as she made her way back into the ballroom, each step measured and deliberate. Inside, she felt like screaming, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, your dignity is something no one can take unless you give it away." The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, now seeming harsh rather than elegant. Couples swayed to Auld Lang Syne, while servers weaved through the crowd with fresh champagne. Nobody noticed yet that Mrs. Julian Cross's world had just imploded. She reached up and touched her wedding ring, 3 carats of flawless diamond that had felt so heavy when Julian first placed it on her finger. Now it felt like it was burning her skin. With steady hands, she twisted it off. Julian's podium stood at the front of the ballroom, where he would soon give his annual New Year's address to the gathered elite of Manhattan. The polished wooden surface reflected the overhead lights, and Nia placed her ring there, the diamond catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the surface. "Mrs. Cross?" One of the event coordinators approached with a concerned look. "Is everything all right? Mr. Cross will be speaking in just a few minutes." "No," Nia said quietly, her voice stronger than she expected. "Everything is not all right, and I am no longer Mrs. Cross." The coordinator's eyes widened as she noticed the ring on the podium. Others nearby began to turn, sensing something was happening. Phones appeared in hands, cameras ready. Julian emerged from the hallway, straightening his bow tie, the blonde woman nowhere in sight. He froze when he saw Nia standing by his podium, the growing crowd of murmuring guests between them. "I'm leaving you, Julian," Nia announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quieting room. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Truth had its own power. "Your secrets can stay in that private lounge, but I won't be one of them anymore." Camera flashes began popping like the fireworks outside. Julian's face flushed red as he tried to push through the crowd, but the damage was done. His carefully crafted image cracked with each flash of light, each whispered comment, each shocked gasp. Nia turned away from his approaching figure and walked towards the exit. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound seeming to echo in the stunned silence that had fallen over the ballroom. She held her head high, even as tears threatened to spill. The coat check attendant scrambled to find her wrap, hands shaking as he helped her into it. Through the glass doors, she could see the waiting paparazzi, their cameras already raised. They'd been waiting all night for the perfect shot of guests arriving and leaving. Now they would get something far more interesting. The bitter January wind hit her face as she stepped outside, the tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over. Camera flashes exploded around her like stars, capturing every detail of her pain for tomorrow's headlines. Questions flew at her from all directions. "Mrs. Cross, what happened? Is it true you're leaving, Julian? Did you just end your marriage at the gala?" The valet brought her car around, Her own car, not one of Julian's fleet of luxury vehicles. She'd driven herself tonight, something Julian had complained about. Now she was grateful for that small act of independence. Once inside the car, she sat in silence, watching her breath fog the windows. Her phone began to vibrate continuously as notifications poured in. News alerts, text messages, social media mentions, all broadcasting her private heartbreak to the world. She picked up her phone, scanning the headlines that were already appearing. Breaking: Nia Carter leaves billionaire Julian Cross at New Year's Gala. Cross Foundation Gala ends in scandal. Power couple splits as wife makes dramatic exit. Her hands shook as she turned off notifications, but not before seeing Julian's name trending on social media. The public spectacle was just beginning, and she knew the coming days would bring more exposure than she'd ever wanted. In the quiet darkness of her car, Nia closed her eyes. For the first time since her grandmother passed away, she found herself whispering the prayer they used to say together. "Lord, I don't know the path ahead, but I know who guides my steps. Grant me the strength to face tomorrow with grace." The prayer felt rusty on her lips, but somehow right. Her grandmother had always said that prayer wasn't about asking for an easy path. It was about asking for strength to walk the difficult one. A fresh wave of tears rolled down her cheeks as she sat in the dark car, her phone continuing to light up with news alerts. But these tears felt different, not just of pain, but of release, of truth finally spoken, of chains finally broken. The pale January sunlight crept through faded curtains, rousing Nia from a fitful sleep. For a moment, the familiar floral wallpaper and worn wooden dresser of her grandmother's bedroom confused her. Then yesterday's memories crashed over her like an icy wave. She pressed her face into the old quilt, inhaling the lingering scent of lavender that always reminded her of Gran. The bedroom hadn't changed since her childhood. The same creaky floorboards, the same Bible on the nightstand, the same view of the brick church across the street. Now it served as her sanctuary from the chaos she'd left behind in Manhattan. The aroma of coffee and cinnamon drifted up from downstairs. Nia pulled on her grandmother's old powder blue robe and made her way down to the kitchen, where Aunt Marjorie stood at the stove stirring a pot of oatmeal. "There's my girl," Marjorie said softly, opening her arms. Nia walked into her aunt's embrace, feeling tears threaten again. Now. The Lord never gives us more than we can handle, even when it feels that way." "I don't know about that, Aunt Marge," Nia whispered, sinking into a kitchen chair that had hosted 4 decades of family meals. "Everything I built with Julian, it feels like it was all a lie." Marjorie set a steaming mug of coffee in front of her niece. "Open your Bible to Psalm 27, verse 14. She tapped the worn leather book on the table. "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord." Sometimes waiting is the hardest part, but it's also where we find our strength. Nia's phone buzzed again, the screen showing another call from Julian's legal team. She turned it face down without answering. Since dawn, they'd called 15 times. "You don't have to talk to anyone until you're ready," Marjorie assured her, settling into the chair beside Nia with her own coffee. The morning news played quietly from the small TV on the counter. Nia's heart clenched as her own face appeared on the screen. "Breaking news continues this morning after socialite Nia Carter's dramatic exit from husband Julian Cross's New Year's Eve gala," the anchor announced. Social media has erupted with support for Carter, praising her dignified response to... Marjorie clicked off the TV. "That's enough of that foolishness. What matters is what's in your heart, not what's on their tongues." Nia wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its steadiness. "People keep calling me brave. I don't feel brave. I feel..." She searched for the right word. Lost. Then it's a good thing you're found, Marjorie said firmly. Right here, where you've always belonged. Throughout the morning, Nia's phone continued its relentless buzz with messages from friends, reporters, and Julian's persistent lawyers. She read none of them. Instead, she helped Marjorie with simple tasks, folding laundry, dusting the living room shelves, organizing old church bulletins. The familiar routines felt like stepping back in time, before Julian, before the spotlight, before her heart learned what betrayal felt like. Around noon, the church bells rang out across the street, their deep tones reverberating through the old townhouse. Nia paused at the window, watching people gather for the daily prayer service. How many times had she sat in those pews with her grandmother, learning about faith and forgiveness? Your gran always said those bells were God's reminder to pause and breathe, Marjorie commented, joining her at the window. Maybe that's what you need right now, just to pause and breathe. Tears slid down Nia's cheeks. I keep thinking about the cameras, Aunt Marge. All those people, watching me fall apart. Child, they weren't watching you fall apart. They were watching you stand up. Marjorie squeezed her hand. There's a difference. As evening approached, the constant phone notifications finally began to slow. Nia sat on the old porch swing, wrapped in a warm blanket against the January chill. The neighborhood was quiet except for distant traffic and the occasional bark of Mrs. Patterson's dog next door. It felt worlds away from the penthouse she'd shared with Julian. Tea? Marjorie appeared with 2 steaming mugs. Thanks. Nia accepted one, making room on the swing. I think the worst might be over. At least the phones have stopped ringing. Good. Marjorie settled beside her. Tomorrow's another day. We'll face it together, whatever comes. Later that night, Nia lay in her grandmother's bed, listening to the gentle toll of church bells marking the evening service. The familiar sound wrapped around her like a lullaby, easing the ache in her heart. Her eyes grew heavy as she thought about all the nights she'd fallen asleep to these same bells as a child, safe and loved in this very room. The day's exhaustion finally overtook her, and Nia drifted off to sleep, surrounded by memories of simpler times. Outside her window, the church bells continued their steady song, while somewhere in the darkness, forces were gathering that would soon test her faith in ways she could never imagine. The steady drumming of rain against the windows filled the small living room of Nia's grandmother's townhouse. 2 days had passed since her world had shattered at the New Year's gala, and Nia found comfort in the familiar surroundings. The worn leather armchair where her grandmother used to read, the carefully dusted family photos, the old wooden cross hanging above the fireplace. She wrapped her hands around a warm mug of tea, trying to focus on the simple pleasure of its warmth, rather than the constant buzz of her phone. The media coverage hadn't died down. If anything, it had gotten worse. The doorbell rang, its harsh chime making her jump. Through the rain-streaked window, she could make out a dark figure standing on the front steps. Her Aunt Marjorie was at church, and Nia hadn't been expecting any visitors. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to find a tall man in a charcoal grey suit. Despite the rain, he looked perfectly composed, not a hair out of place. "Mrs. Cross?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "It's Carter now." Nia corrected him automatically. "I've gone back to my maiden name." He nodded, reaching into his jacket to produce a business card. "My name is Caleb Harlan. I'm a private investigator working with your husband's legal team. May I come in? What I need to discuss is sensitive." Nia hesitated, studying the card. Something in his careful choice of words made her uneasy, but she stepped aside to let him enter. The rain had picked up, drumming harder against the windows. "Would you like some tea?" she offered, more out of ingrained politeness than genuine hospitality. No, thank you. Caleb remained standing, his eyes taking in every detail of the room with practiced efficiency. I'll be direct, Miss Carter. There's a situation developing that you need to be aware of. The way he said situation made Nia's stomach tighten. She sank into her grandmother's armchair, clutching her mug like a shield. The woman you saw with Julian at the gala. Caleb continued, his tone measured. Her name is Serena Vale. She's missing. The tea suddenly tasted bitter in Nia's mouth. Missing. She hasn't been seen since the early hours of New Year's Day. The last person known to have contact with her was Julian Cross. Nia set her mug down with trembling hands. The rain seemed louder now, filling the silence between them. I don't understand. Are you suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything. Caleb interrupted smoothly. I'm simply sharing information you should have, given your connection to the situation. He moved to the window, watching the rain. Ms. Carter, in my line of work, I've learned that powerful men rarely accept public humiliation gracefully. They don't face problems, they erase them. The words hung in the air like smoke. Nia felt cold despite the warmth of the room. Why are you telling me this? Caleb turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. Because right now, you're connected to two very public situations involving Julian Cross. Your dramatic exit from his life, and now Serena Vale's disappearance. That's not a comfortable position to be in. I had nothing to do with— Nia started to protest. Of course not. He cut in. But perception matters more than truth in cases like this. You should be careful. The way he studied her reactions made Nia feel like a specimen under glass. She stood up, needing to move, to do something to shake off the growing dread in her chest. I think you should leave now, she said, proud that her voice remained steady. Caleb nodded, reaching into his jacket again. He placed another card on the coffee table. When you're ready to talk more, and you will be, call this number, day or night. Nia walked him to the door, desperate to have him out of her grandmother's house, away from this space that had felt safe until now. As she closed the door behind him, she leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. The rain continued its relentless drumming, but now it felt less like comfort and more like warning. Her phone buzzed again on the side table, another news alert. With trembling fingers, she picked it up and read the headline. Missing woman linked to Cross scandal. The mug she'd left on the table had gone cold, a thin skin forming on the surface of the tea. Nia stared at it, remembering how just minutes ago her biggest concern had been avoiding reporters and dealing with divorce lawyers. Now she was somehow tangled in something far darker, far more dangerous than a failed marriage. Her grandmother's cross caught the grey light from the window, casting a long shadow on the wall. Nia touched the smooth wood, seeking comfort in its familiar texture. But for the first time since she'd sought refuge in this house, not even her grandmother's memories could chase away the chill of fear settling deep in her bones. The business card Caleb had left seemed to mock her from the coffee table. She picked it up, running her thumb over the embossed letters. The simple black text offered a direct line to answers she wasn't sure she wanted, about questions she never thought she'd have to ask. A car door slammed outside, making her jump. It was just a neighbor, but suddenly every sound seemed threatening, every shadow potentially hiding something sinister. The safe haven of her grandmother's house had transformed into something else entirely. A place where uncomfortable truths were forcing their way in, carried by the steady beat of rain and the weight of words like missing and erased. She sank back into the armchair, her grandmother's presence feeling very far away now. The reality of her situation was sinking in. This wasn't just about a betrayed wife walking away with her head held high. Somehow, without wanting or choosing it, her name was now tied to something far more sinister than a broken marriage. The evening wrapped Manhattan in deep purple shadows as Nia sat cross-legged on her grandmother's living room floor. Scattered around her were stacks of financial documents she'd brought from her former life with Julian, papers she'd barely glanced at during their marriage. Her laptop glowed softly beside her, spreadsheets open and waiting. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, rubbing her tired eyes. The day's encounter with Caleb Harlan had left her unsettled, his warnings echoing in her mind like footsteps in an empty church. She picked up another folder, this one labeled Cross Foundation Quarterly Reports. During their marriage, she'd been proud of Julian's charitable giving, even serving on several foundation boards herself. But now, studying the numbers with fresh eyes, something felt wrong. Nia frowned at a series of transactions, large sums moving between accounts, passing through multiple charitable organizations before disappearing into numbered accounts she didn't recognize. "That's strange," she muttered, making notes in her journal. The Children's Hope Initiative receiving funds, then transferring identical amounts to where exactly? Her phone buzzed, making her jump. A news alert lit up the screen, and Nia's heart seemed to stop. There was Serena's face, the same woman she'd seen with Julian on New Year's Eve, now featured in a missing person report. The young woman's smile looked different in the photo, more innocent than the glimpse Nia had caught at the gala. The article mentioned she'd last been seen leaving the Cross New Year's celebration. "Oh God," Nia breathed, her hand trembling as she set down the phone. The gravity of what Caleb had suggested earlier became real, pressing down on her chest like a physical weight. What if Julian was capable of worse than infidelity? What if these financial discrepancies weren't just creative accounting? From the kitchen, she could hear Aunt Marjorie humming an old hymn while washing dishes. The familiar sound anchored her, reminding her of countless evenings spent in this house while her grandmother taught her about faith and integrity. Nia gathered the most troubling documents into a separate folder, her mind racing. She thought about Serena, not as the other woman, but as someone who might be in real danger, someone who might have seen behind Julian's careful facade and paid a price for it. Rising from the floor, her knees stiff from sitting so long, Nia walked to the old roll-top desk where her grandmother's Bible still sat. The leather was worn soft from years of daily reading, the pages marked with sticky notes and underlined verses. She ran her fingers along the spine, remembering how her grandmother would say, "Truth is a light, baby girl. It shows us the way, even when that way is hard." Kneeling beside the desk, Nia opened the Bible to where a ribbon marked Psalms. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the margins, prayers, dates, little notes of encouragement. Tears welled in her eyes as she thought about how simple everything had seemed when she was younger, sitting at her grandmother's feet, learning about right and wrong. "I don't want revenge, Lord," she prayed softly, her forehead resting against her clasped hands. "I don't want to hurt Julian or anyone else, but if something terrible is happening, if Serena's in danger, I need to know the truth. I need wisdom to know what to do with it." The house creaked gently around her, familiar sounds that had comforted her since childhood. But now they seemed to whisper warnings, reminding her that seeking truth might lead to places far darker than a broken heart. Rising from her knees, Nia looked at the scattered papers, the missing person report still glowing on her phone, the Bible open to her grandmother's favorite Psalms. She thought of Serena, somewhere out there, perhaps afraid or worse. She thought of other possible victims, their stories hidden in the maze of financial transactions she'd discovered. "Okay," she whispered, squaring her shoulders. "Whatever it costs me, whatever comfort I have to give up, I need to find out what's really going on. She began gathering the documents, organizing them with purpose now rather than confusion. The truth wouldn't be comfortable, but her grandmother had taught her that comfort wasn't always a virtue. She glanced one more time at Serena's photo, seeing not a rival, but a fellow human being who might need help. The young woman's smile seemed to plead with her now, asking for something more important than jealousy or pride. Nia nodded slightly, as if making a promise to both Serena and herself. The night deepened outside her grandmother's old townhouse, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Nia sat at the desk, opened a fresh page in her journal, and began to write down everything she knew, everything she suspected, and everything she needed to find out. The path ahead would be difficult, but at least now she knew which direction to walk, toward truth, whatever the cost. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the small coffee shop, casting warm patches on the worn wooden table where Nia sat waiting. Her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, more for comfort than warmth. The quiet buzz of conversation and the gentle clink of cups provided a soothing backdrop as she watched the door. When Lydia Monroe walked in, Nia felt a flutter of relief. The accountant looked exactly as she remembered. Practical navy blazer, sensible shoes, and those distinctive red-framed glasses. Lydia's face brightened with recognition, then quickly shifted to concern as she approached. "Nia," Lydia said softly, sliding into the booth. "I saw the news. I'm so sorry." Nia managed a small smile. "Thank you, but that's not why I called you." She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder stuffed with financial documents. Her hands trembled slightly as she spread them across the table. "I need your eyes on these, Lydia. Something isn't right." Lydia leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. Her fingers moved carefully through the papers, pausing occasionally to make quiet sounds of recognition or concern. After several minutes, she looked up, her expression grave. "These foundations," Lydia said, tapping a document. "I flagged them years ago when I worked there. The flow of money, it's like water disappearing into sand. No clear destination." Nia's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? See these transfers?" Lydia pointed to a series of numbers. "They're going through legitimate-looking charities, but then splitting into smaller amounts. Those smaller amounts feed into shell companies, businesses that exist on paper but don't actually do anything." They spent the next hour hunched over laptops and papers, mapping connections. Lydia created a timeline on her notepad, drawing lines between companies and dates. With each new connection, Nia's anxiety grew. "Look at this," Lydia said, pulling up a digital document. "This offshore account in the Cayman Islands, it's receiving regular deposits from 3 different foundations you oversee." Nia frowned. "I've never approved anything like that. But your signature is here." Lydia pointed to a line at the bottom of the page. "And here, and here." Nia leaned in, studying the signatures. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment. "Those are my signatures, but I never signed these documents. I would remember this." "Digital signatures can be copied," Lydia explained gently, "especially if someone has access to your personal information and original signed documents." Implications hit Nia like a physical blow. She thought about the missing woman, Serena Vale, and the warning from the private investigator. Everything was starting to form a terrifying pattern. "Julian's been using my name," she whispered. "My reputation. My signature." Lydia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "There's more. These transactions, they started ramping up about 6 months ago. The amounts got bigger, the shell companies multiplied. It's like someone knew they were running out of time." Nia's phone buzzed with another news alert. She ignored it, focusing instead on the growing web of financial connections spread across the table. Each line, each number, each signature represented a thread in a web she hadn't known she was caught in. "The foundations," Nia said slowly. "I trusted Julian when he said they were doing good work. I spoke at fundraisers, convinced other people to donate. I vouched for them." "You couldn't have known," Lydia assured her. "These setups are designed to look perfect from the outside. That's why I left the company. I saw enough to make me uncomfortable, but never enough to prove anything concrete." They worked through lunch, piecing together more connections. By early afternoon, the picture was clear enough to be frightening. Julian hadn't just built a financial empire, he'd built a maze, with Nia's name woven throughout. Lydia sat back, removing her glasses to rub her tired eyes. "Nia," she said carefully, "you need to understand what this means. These documents, your signatures, they don't just expose you to scrutiny. They create a paper trail leading straight to you." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if anything goes wrong, if authorities start investigating, if money goes missing, if questions get asked about certain transactions, your name is all over these documents, your signature, your reputation." Lydia paused, choosing her words carefully. "You're not just exposed, you're being positioned." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Nia looked down at her hands, remembering how proud she'd been to sign those first foundation documents years ago. How certain she'd been that she was helping to make the world better. Now those same signatures felt like chains. Outside the coffee shop, life continued normally. People walked past the windows, laughing and talking on phones. Cars honked in afternoon traffic. But inside, Nia sat very still, feeling the weight of discovery settle onto her shoulders. She had thought Julian's betrayal ended with another woman. Now she understood it went much deeper, spreading like roots through years of carefully planned deception. Lydia began gathering the documents, organizing them with precise movements. "We should make copies of everything," she said. "And Nia, you need to be very careful about who you trust right now." Nia nodded, her grandmother's wisdom echoing in her mind. Truth is light, it shows both, the path and the pitfalls. The truth was beginning to shine very bright indeed, illuminating dangers she never imagined she'd face. The grandfather clock in Nia's living room struck 9 when her phone lit up with Julian's name. She stared at it, vibrating against the coffee table, her heart picking up speed. After 6 days of silence, here he was. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Hello, Julian." "Nia." His voice carried that familiar smoothness, like aged whiskey in crystal, expensive and carefully controlled. "I trust you're well." She sat straighter on her grandmother's floral couch, steadying herself. "What do you want?" "I'm concerned about you, darling. These meetings you're having, these investigations, they're unnecessary and potentially damaging." He paused, letting the words sink in. "To everyone involved." Nia's fingers tightened around her phone. "You mean damaging to you? Listen to me carefully." His tone shifted slightly, like a door slowly closing. "This situation with Serena, it's being handled. She was unstable, Nia, troubled. The authorities are well equipped to deal with this." "Troubled?" Nia's voice caught. "The woman I saw that night didn't look troubled, Julian. She looked terrified." "You saw what you wanted to see? A moment taken out of context during an emotional time?" He sighed, the sound crackling through the speaker. "The police will handle everything. There's no need for you to involve yourself further." Something in his careful words made Nia's skin crawl. She walked to her window, pulling back the curtain to peer into the darkness. "Why are you really calling, Julian?" "Because I care about your well-being. These amateur investigations you're conducting, They could lead to complications. Legal ones. I'm trying to protect you." Nia let out a bitter laugh. "Protect me? Like you protected our marriage?" "That's not fair." His voice hardened. "I made a mistake. Yes. But this is different. You're putting yourself at risk by pursuing matters that don't concern you." "Don't concern me?" Heat rose in her chest. "My name is on those foundation documents. My reputation is tied to whatever you've been doing. And now a woman is missing, a woman last seen with you." "Be very careful, Nia." The warning in his voice was clear now, all pretense of concern stripped away. Some doors are better left closed. After ending the call, Nia sat in her grandmother's old armchair, trying to steady her shaking hands. Julian's words echoed in her mind, each one carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. She reached for her laptop, opening the folder where she kept copies of her home security footage. The screen flickered to life, but where there should have been footage from the night of the gala, she found only static. Her throat tightened as she clicked through file after file. Everything from that night, gone. Not just corrupted or damaged, but professionally erased. Nia's hands moved quickly now, grabbing paper and pen. She wrote down every detail she could remember from Julian's call. His exact words, his tone shifts, the implied threats. The way he'd mentioned the police as if they were already involved in whatever game he was playing. Standing up, she walked through each room of her grandmother's house, checking windows and doors. Everything looked secure, but something felt wrong. She remembered how Julian always praised her attention to detail, her organized nature. "My perfect partner," he'd called her. Now she wondered if those same traits had made her an ideal target. Moving to her bedroom, she pulled out the old shoebox where she'd been collecting evidence. Bank statements, foundation documents, news clippings about Serena's disappearance. She spread them across her bed, photographing each piece with her phone. The timestamps would prove when she'd discovered each item. A car drove by outside, its headlights sweeping across her walls. Nia froze, watching the beam of light move across her bedroom ceiling. It passed slowly, too slowly. Her heart pounded as she moved to the window, staying hidden behind the curtain. The black SUV crawled past her house, its tinted windows revealing nothing. But Nia knew. This was Julian's style, subtle but unmistakable. A reminder that he was watching, that he knew her movements. She'd seen him do this to business rivals before, this quiet show of power and surveillance. She gathered her evidence carefully, securing some in a safety deposit box she'd opened that morning, encrypting digital copies on drives stored in different locations. Julian had taught her about redundancy in record-keeping, another lesson she'd turn back on him. Sitting at her grandmother's kitchen table, Nia opened her notebook again. She documented the SUV, its make and model, the time it passed. Every detail mattered now. Julian was methodical, always thinking 3 steps ahead. She'd watched him destroy competitors with carefully orchestrated campaigns of pressure and intimidation. Now she was on the other side of his strategy, watching it unfold with clear eyes. He wasn't just trying to silence her, he was laying groundwork. Every call, every surveillance pass, every friendly warning was building a narrative. She could almost see his endgame. If anything happened to her, it would look like paranoia, like a woman unraveling after a public divorce. The realization settled over her like a heavy blanket. Julian wasn't just watching her, he was writing her story before she could tell it herself. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of Grace Community Church, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Nia Carter sat in her grandmother's favorite spot, 3rd row from the front, where the morning light always seemed to find a way to warm whoever sat there. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old hymnals brought tears to her eyes. "Some things never change, do they?" Pastor Ruth, Collins's gentle voice carried from the back of the sanctuary. The elderly woman moved slowly but deliberately down the center aisle, her silver hair neatly styled and her kind eyes fixed on Nia. "Pastor Ruth." Nia's voice cracked as she stood to embrace the woman who had known her since childhood. "Thank you for meeting me. Child, this is your home as much as anyone's." Pastor Ruth settled beside her, smoothing her sensible navy skirt. "Your grandmother and I spent many hours right here, praying for this community. And for you." Nia twisted her hands in her lap, the empty space where her wedding ring had been still feeling strange. "I don't even know where to start." "Start wherever your heart is heaviest," Pastor Ruth said simply. She placed her weathered hand over Nia's fidgeting ones. "God can handle our mess." The whole story spilled out. The gala, Serena's disappearance, Julian's warning call, the suspicious documents, the wiped security footage. Pastor Ruth listened without interruption, her face remaining calm, even as Nia's voice shook with fear and uncertainty. "I feel like I'm drowning," Nia admitted. "Every time I think I understand what's happening, something new comes up that makes everything darker. What if Julian really did something to Serena?" Pastor Ruth was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the cross hanging at the front of the sanctuary. "You know, there's a verse that's been on my heart since I heard about what happened at the gala. Proverbs 16, verse 25. There is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death." "What do you mean?" Nia asked, her heart beating faster. "Sometimes the easiest path, staying quiet, looking away, protecting ourselves, seems right. But God calls us to walk in truth, even when that path leads through fire." Pastor Ruth's voice grew firm. "Your grandmother understood that. She taught you better than to hide from hard things." Tears slid down Nia's cheeks. "I'm scared, Pastor Ruth. Really scared." "Of course you are. Fear isn't the absence of faith, it's the opportunity to exercise it." The older woman squeezed Nia's hand. "But remember this. Truth often walks through fire before it finds daylight. You're not walking alone." They prayed together, Pastor Ruth's steady voice carrying Nia's unspoken fears heavenward. When they finished, Nia felt something settle in her spirit. Not peace exactly, but purpose. Back at her grandmother's house, Nia spread her evidence across the dining room table. She arranged everything chronologically: financial documents, news articles about Serena's disappearance, notes from her meeting with Lydia, screenshots of suspicious transactions. The afternoon light stretched across the papers as she worked, creating order from chaos. Her grandmother's voice seemed to echo in her mind. "Do what's right, baby girl. The rest is in God's hands." The sudden knock at the door made her jump. Nia glanced at her phone. 6:30 in the evening. Through the front window, she could see 2 police officers standing on her porch, their faces serious in the growing dusk. "Ms. Carter." The female officer spoke first when Nia opened the door. "I'm Detective Morrison. This is Detective Chen. We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions about Serena Vale's disappearance." Nia's heart pounded, but her grandmother's teachings steadied her. "Keep your head high. Tell the truth. Trust God for the outcome." "Of course," she said calmly, reaching for her coat from the hook by the door. "Let me just get my things." Her hands didn't shake as she gathered her purse and phone. The evidence spread across her dining room table would have to wait. As she stepped onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind her, Nia lifted up a silent prayer, not for escape, but for strength to face whatever came next. The police car waited at the curb, its presence drawing curious looks from neighbors. Nia held her, head high as she walked toward it, remembering Pastor Ruth's words about truth walking through fire. She didn't know what questions waited for her at the station, but she knew who walked beside her. Detective Morrison opened the back door, and Nia slid inside, her coat pulled tight around her against the evening chill. As the car pulled away from the curb, she watched her grandmother's house recede in the window, unaware that this simple ride would change everything. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Detective Sarah Martinez led Nia through the stark hallways of the 23rd Precinct. The click of Nia's heels echoed against cold linoleum, each step measured and deliberate despite her racing heart. She'd walked in here believing truth would be her shield. Now, sitting in a cramped interview room with its metal table and uncomfortable chairs, that certainty began to waver. "Mrs. Cross," Detective Martinez began. "Carter," Nia corrected quietly. "I've resumed my maiden name." Detective James Chen, who sat beside his partner, nodded and made a note. "Ms. Carter, then. We appreciate you coming in voluntarily." The word voluntarily hung in the air like a threat. Nia folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "Of course. I want to help find Serena." Detective Martinez reached for a laptop and turned it to face Nia. This footage was captured 2 nights ago, at 11:45 p.m. outside the Meridian Hotel. Nia leaned forward, squinting at the grainy video, her breath caught. There she was, or rather someone who looked exactly like her, entering the hotel's side entrance. The timestamp matched the night Serena disappeared. "That's impossible," Nia whispered. "I was at my aunt's house that entire night. We were watching the evening news together." "Can your aunt confirm this?" Detective Chen asked, his pen poised. "Yes, of course." But even as Nia spoke, doubt crept in. She'd dozed off during the broadcast. What if she couldn't account for every minute? Martinez pulled out another file. "We've also discovered some interesting financial activity." She spread several documents across the table. "These are transfers from an account in your name to an offshore entity. 5 payments of $50,000 each, made over the past 3 months. Nia's hands trembled as she picked up the papers. The account number looked familiar. It was one of the foundation accounts she'd helped manage. But she'd never authorized these transfers. "This isn't right," she said, her voice stronger now. "I never made these transfers. Someone else must have access to these accounts." "Someone like Julian Cross?" Detective Chen suggested. "Or Serena Vale," Martinez added. Nia looked between them, realization dawning. "You think I found out about their affair and… what? That I did something to Serena? Money moves, then Serena disappears. Now we have you on camera at her last known location." Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. "Doesn't look good, Ms. Carter." "I want a lawyer," Nia said quietly. The words felt foreign in her mouth. She'd never imagined needing them. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Wisdom knows when to speak and when to be silent. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of legal terminology and careful statements. Her court-appointed attorney, Mr. Reynolds, arrived quickly, a blessing she hadn't expected. He helped her navigate the questioning, advising her when to answer and when to stay quiet. Finally, at 4:30 in the morning, they released her pending further investigation. Mr. Reynolds walked her to the precinct's front entrance, his briefcase clutched tight. "Ms. Carter," he said, "don't leave town, and don't speak to anyone about this investigation." Nia nodded, too exhausted for words, but as she pushed open the heavy glass doors, flashbulbs exploded in her face. Somehow the press had gotten wind of her questioning. "Ms. Carter, did you confront Serena Vale about the affair? Were you embezzling from your husband's charity? Do you know where Serena is?" The questions came like bullets, each one finding its mark. Nia pulled her coat collar up, shielding her face as she hurried toward her waiting rideshare. The driver looked nervous, clearly recognizing her from the news. Morning light was just beginning to streak the sky as they pulled up to her aunt's townhouse. More reporters waited there, camped out on the sidewalk with cameras and microphones. Nia paid the driver and took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders before stepping out. "Ms. Carter, care to comment on the surveillance footage? Is it true you're being investigated for fraud? What happened to Serena Vale?" She kept her head high as she walked through their midst, just as her grandmother had taught her. "Let your dignity be your armor," she'd always said. But with each step, each shouted question, that armor felt thinner. Inside, Aunt Marjorie waited with a pot of coffee and worried eyes. Nia collapsed onto the worn sofa, the same one where she'd supposedly been during the surveillance video's timestamp. "They think I did something to her," Nia said, her voice hollow. "They think I hurt Serena." Marjorie sat beside her, taking her hand. "The Lord knows the truth, baby." "But the evidence—" Nia's voice cracked. "They have video of me, Aunt Marjorie. Video I know isn't real, but how do I prove that? They have financial records with my name all over them." She reached for her phone, dreading what she'd find. The headlines already blazed across every news site. Julian Cross's ex-wife questioned in disappearance. Charity fraud investigation opens into Nia Carter, from wronged wife to prime suspect. The same photos appeared again and again, her walking into the precinct, head held high, and leaving hours later, clearly shaken. Side by side with these were still shots from New Year's Eve, when she'd walked away from Julian with such dignity. The contrast was stark, from sympathetic figure to suspected criminal in less than a week. Nia set the phone down, her hand steadied despite everything. The truth was there, buried beneath the fabricated evidence and manufactured story. She just had to find it before they buried her instead. "I need to pray," she whispered. But for the first time since this began, words failed her. She sat in silence, watching dawn paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, wondering how many more sunrises she would see as a free woman. The quiet was broken by another news alert on her phone. Her own face stared back at her from the screen, no longer the wronged wife who'd walked away with Grace, but a suspect in something far darker. The transformation was complete. Detective Morris adjusted his jacket against the morning chill as squad cars pulled up to Nia's grandmother's townhouse. The quiet street seemed to hold its breath. Neighbors peered through curtains, drawn by the flash of red and blue lights against brick walls still wet from earlier rain. Nia had just finished her morning prayers when the heavy knock came. Her heart jumped, but she moved with deliberate calm to open the door. The warrant, held in Detective Morris's outstretched hand, seemed to blur before her eyes. "Mrs. Cross, we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Serena Vale." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nia's Aunt Marjorie appeared behind her, gasping softly. "This is ridiculous! She hasn't done anything!" "Ma'am, please step aside," another officer instructed firmly. Nia touched her aunt's arm gently. "It's okay, Aunt Marge. Call Pastor Ruth." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she was instructed to turn around. The cold metal of handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Mrs. Chen from next door stood on her porch in her bathrobe, hand pressed to her mouth. The elderly couple across the street, who had known Nia since childhood, watched with dismay as officers led her down the front steps. "Keep your head up, baby," Aunt Marjorie called out, her voice breaking. "God knows the truth." Camera phones appeared as neighbors recorded the scene. Nia could already imagine the footage spreading across social media, another chapter in the spectacle her life had become. She lifted her chin, refusing to bow her head as she was guided into the back of a police car. Through the window, she caught glimpses of her childhood street, the crooked basketball hoop where she used to play, the garden where her grandmother had taught her about faith taking root and growing strong. Now those memories seemed to mock her present reality. At the police station, the processing felt surreal. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal belongings catalogued and stored. Each step stripped away another layer of dignity, but Nia held on to her grandmother's teachings like a lifeline. Stand firm when lies come against you, her grandmother had said once, smoothing Nia's hair after. School bullies had accused her of cheating. Truth doesn't need defending, it just needs time to shine. The holding cell was small and cold, with grey walls that seemed to pulse with the fluorescent lights overhead. A thin bench ran along one wall, the metal worn smooth by countless others who had sat here before. Nia perched on its edge, her designer dress now wrinkled and inappropriate for her surroundings. Hours crawled by. Through it all, Julian's silence echoed louder than any accusation. No calls, no lawyers appearing on her behalf. The man who had once promised to protect her forever was letting her sit in a cell, framed for a crime they both knew she didn't commit. Despair circled like a vulture, waiting for her resolve to crack. Nia closed her eyes, remembering Sunday mornings in church with her grandmother, the old hymns that had shaped her faith, standing on the promises that cannot fail. "Dear Lord," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the stale air. "I don't understand your plan right now, but I choose to trust you. Help me stand firm. Help me remember that you see everything, even when justice seems far away." The prayer steadied her, as prayers always had. Fear still pressed against her chest, but it couldn't penetrate the core of peace that her faith provided. She thought of Serena Vale, wherever she was, and prayed for her safety too. Outside her cell, officers passed by with purposeful steps. Phones rang in distant offices. The normal business of justice continued while Nia sat in limbo, her future balanced on the edge of truth and lies. A young officer brought her water in a paper cup. His eyes held a hint of uncertainty, as if he wasn't fully convinced of her guilt. Nia thanked him quietly, noting how he hesitated before walking away. Even small kindnesses felt significant in this sterile space. She thought of Pastor Ruth's words from days before. Truth often walks through fire before it finds daylight. The holding cell, certainly, felt like fire, a testing ground for everything she believed about justice, faith, and her own strength. The metal door stood before her, solid and unyielding. Beyond it lay an uncertain path, interrogations, court appearances, media circus. Nia stared at its scratched surface, her grandmother's Bible verses running through her mind like a protective shield. Time seemed to lose meaning in the windowless cell. Nia sat straight-backed on the bench, her posture reflecting a dignity that circumstances couldn't touch. She was innocent, and that truth would have to be enough for now, even if she didn't know how or when it would come to light. The cell door represented more than just physical confinement. It was a boundary between her past life of privilege and an uncertain future. Yet, as Nia looked at it, she felt something settle in her spirit. Truth might be delayed, but it couldn't be denied forever. She would wait, and she would trust, no matter how long the night ahead might be. The holding cell's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Nia shifted on the hard metal bench. She hadn't slept, spending the night alternating between prayer and replaying every moment that led her here. Her wrinkled business suit, usually crisp and professional, now felt like a costume from someone else's life. "Carter, your attorney's here," the guard announced, keys jingling as she opened the cell door. Nia stood, smoothing her clothes with trembling hands. The meeting room was small and sterile, with a scratched metal table and plastic chairs. Her court-appointed attorney, Mr. Dennis Weber, looked barely older than a college graduate. Papers spilled from his overstuffed briefcase as he tried to organize them. "Ms. Carter, I'm Dennis Weber," he said, pushing up glasses that kept sliding down his nose. "I've reviewed the preliminary evidence and, well..." He shuffled through documents, dropping several. "The prosecution has surveillance footage, financial records, and circumstantial evidence linking you to Ms. Vale's disappearance." Nia watched him struggle to maintain eye contact. "None of that evidence is real, Mr. Weber. It's all fabricated." "Right, yes, of course." He cleared his throat. "But Mr. Cross's legal team has submitted extensive documentation. Their resources are substantial." The word carried the weight of defeat. "You're afraid of going against Julian?" Nia said softly. It wasn't a question. Weber's shoulders slumped. "Ms. Carter, you have to understand. His influence extends beyond just legal channels. I've seen careers end for less." Before Nia could respond, the door opened. A guard stepped in. "You have another visitor, Carter. Judge Whitfield." Nia's heart skipped. Eleanor Whitfield entered the room with the quiet authority that had commanded federal courtrooms for decades. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her posture straight despite her 70 years. Recognition flickered in her eyes as she saw Nia. "Young lady," Eleanor said warmly. "I believe we've met before." 3 years ago," Nia replied, emotion catching in her throat. "The Benjamin Street housing project. You were looking for an apartment after retiring?" Eleanor smiled. "You helped an old judge navigate income requirements and paperwork with more patience than I deserved. You treated me with the same respect when you thought I was just another senior citizen as you did after learning my former position." Weber stood awkwardly. "Judge Whitfield, I didn't realize..." "Mr. Weber, would you give us a moment?" Eleanor's tone was gentle but firm. The young attorney gathered his scattered papers and hurried out. Eleanor took the vacant seat, her kind eyes studying Nia's face. "I've been following your case. Something doesn't add up. The evidence..." Nia began. "I'm not talking about evidence." Eleanor interrupted. "I'm talking about character. In 40 years on the bench, I learned to read people. You spent hours helping me find affordable housing, when you could have passed me to someone else. That same month, I watched you organize emergency supplies for flood victims. The woman I observed then doesn't match these accusations." Tears welled in Nia's eyes. "Julian has resources I can't fight. He's making me look guilty of something I'd never do." Eleanor reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Nia's. "Money can buy a lot of things, my dear. It can fabricate evidence, influence witnesses, even sway public opinion. But it cannot change who you truly are." "I don't know what to do," Nia whispered. "Every time I try to defend myself, more evidence appears against me. It's like fighting shadows." "Then perhaps it's time to stop fighting shadows and start seeking light." Eleanor's voice carried decades of wisdom. "I may be retired, but I still know how truth moves through the justice system. Sometimes it needs help finding its way." "You believe me?" The question came out small, vulnerable. "I believe in what I've seen, with my own eyes. Character isn't a costume we wear. It's revealed in moments when we think no one is watching." Eleanor sat back, her expression determined. "I can't represent you legally, but I can help guide you through what's coming. There are patterns to how powerful men try to bury truth. I've seen them all." For the first time since her arrest, Nia felt hope stir in her chest. It wasn't the desperate hope of earlier, but something steadier, like her grandmother's faith, built on solid ground. "They're going to try to make you doubt yourself," Eleanor continued. "That's the first step in breaking someone's spirit. But remember this, truth doesn't need complex manipulation to exist. It simply is." Nia straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from the older woman's presence. "How do we begin?" by understanding that what looks like your greatest weakness may actually be your strength. They expect you to act from fear. Instead, we'll act from truth." Eleanor's eyes sparked. "With purpose. I've spent my life watching how justice works and how some try to work around it. Together, we'll uncover what others are afraid to see." The guard appeared at the door, signaling the end of visiting hours. Eleanor stood, her dignity undiminished by the institutional surroundings. "Keep your faith, Nia," she said softly. "Not just in God, but in who He made you to be. That's something no amount of money can take away." As Eleanor's footsteps faded down the corridor, Nia closed her eyes. The cell didn't feel quite so cold anymore. Someone believed in her, not just in her innocence, but in her character. It wasn't legal representation, but it was something perhaps more valuable. Moral clarity from someone who had spent a lifetime distinguishing truth from power. The holding cell's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Nia's face as she tried to rest on the thin mattress. Sleep had been impossible, her mind racing with fears of what tomorrow might bring. The metallic clang of the cell door opening made her sit up quickly. "Mrs. Cross," the guard said, "you have a visitor." Eleanor Whitfield stood in the doorway, her silver hair neatly styled, and her posture as commanding as ever. Despite the early hour, she wore a pressed navy suit that spoke of decades spent in federal courtrooms. Her presence brought an immediate sense of calm to the stark room. "Good morning, Nia," Eleanor said warmly. "I hope you don't mind an early visit. We have work to do." Nia smoothed her wrinkled clothes, managing a small smile. "I'm just grateful you're here, Judge Whitfield." "Eleanor, please." The older woman settled into the metal chair, placing her leather briefcase on the table between them. "I spent most of the night making calls to old friends, people who owe me favors, and more importantly, people who aren't afraid of Julian Cross." Hope flickered in Nia's chest for the first time since her arrest. "Did you find anything?" "More than something," Eleanor replied, her voice low but clear. "There's been an ongoing federal investigation into Julian's business dealings for the past 18 months. Sealed records, carefully contained. The kind of case that requires absolute secrecy." Nia leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "And Serena? Was she involved?" Eleanor nodded slowly. Serena Vale wasn't just another victim of Julian's schemes, she was a key witness. She'd been working with federal investigators, providing documentation of financial fraud across multiple foundations. Tears welled in Nia's eyes as the pieces began falling into place. "So when I saw them together at the gala, it wasn't what you thought," Eleanor confirmed gently. "Serena was likely trying to get final pieces of evidence. But something went wrong that night. The investigators lost contact with her shortly after." Nia's heart raced as she remembered Caleb Harlan's ominous visit, his careful study of her reactions. Everyone thought she was dead, that Julian had... She couldn't finish the sentence. "That's exactly what he wanted people to think," Eleanor said. "Fear is a powerful weapon, Nia, but Serena Vale is very much alive." The words hung in the air as Nia processed their meaning. "She's alive?" "In witness protection," Eleanor explained. "The federal marshals moved her immediately after the gala when her cover was compromised. They couldn't risk Julian discovering she'd been gathering evidence against him." Relief flooded through Nia, followed quickly by a wave of complex emotions. "All this time, I thought, and Julian let me believe." Her voice cracked. Eleanor reached across the table, her hand warm on Nia's arm. "He used your natural reaction to create a perfect smokescreen. Your public departure from the gala gave him cover for Serena's disappearance. Then he carefully constructed evidence to make you appear responsible." "The surveillance footage," Nia whispered. The financial transfers. All fabricated, Eleanor confirmed. My contacts at the FBI's forensic lab confirmed the timestamps were altered on the security footage. The money transfers were routed through shell companies designed to look like they were controlled by you. Nia closed her eyes, remembering the detectives' faces as they showed her the evidence. They wanted to believe it was me. Julian's legal team made sure of that. Eleanor said, they fed the investigation exactly what they needed to build a case against you. It was masterfully done. If you weren't who you are, it might have worked. What do you mean? A small smile crossed Eleanor's face. Character matters, Nia. When I started asking questions, people remembered you. The charity work you've done, the lives you've touched. No one who truly knew you believed you capable of violence. Tears slid down Nia's cheeks. My grandmother always said truth walks through fire before finding daylight. Wise woman. Eleanor nodded. And in this case, the truth is already making its way to the right people. The prosecutors are reviewing everything in light of the new evidence. How long? Nia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hours, not days. Eleanor assured her. The federal investigation takes precedence now. Julian's carefully constructed house of cards is about to fall. Nia sat back, exhaustion and relief washing over her in equal measure. I should feel angry, she said softly, but mostly I just feel sad. Sad for Serena having to leave her whole life behind. Sad for all the people Julian hurt while pretending to help them. Eleanor studied her with knowing eyes. That compassion is exactly why you survived this with your soul intact, Nia. You never lost sight of what matters. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Through the small window, Nia could see several officials in suits speaking urgently with the guards. Right on schedule, Eleanor said with satisfaction. Those would be the federal prosecutors coming to begin dismantling the case against you. Nia's hands trembled slightly. What happens now? Now, Eleanor said, standing and gathering her briefcase. You walk out of here with your head high, knowing that truth did indeed find its daylight. And Julian Cross learns that some things can't be bought or buried. The cell door opened again, this time revealing men and women in formal attire, their faces serious but apologetic. As they began speaking, explaining the situation and offering immediate release, Nia caught Eleanor's eye. The older woman gave her a gentle nod, and Nia felt strength flow through her tired body. The truth had walked through fire, just as her grandmother promised. And though the flames had been hot, they hadn't consumed her. They had refined her, burning away fear and leaving behind something stronger, a faith in justice that no amount of money or power could shake. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Nia sat quietly beside Eleanor Whitfield, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. Julian sat at the defense table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his expression controlled as always. Federal Prosecutor Sarah Chen approached the bench with purposeful steps. Your Honor, we have new evidence that fundamentally changes this case. She placed a thick folder on the judge's desk. These documents reveal Mr. Cross has been operating under multiple identities across 3 continents. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, examined the papers carefully. Nia watched as Julian's composed facade cracked slightly, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, a tightening of his jaw. The prosecution would like to present evidence that Mr. Cross, operating under the alias Marcus Blackwood, orchestrated an elaborate scheme of financial fraud through his charitable foundations. Prosecutor Chen's voice rang clear through the hushed courtroom. Furthermore, we have proof that he deliberately manufactured evidence to frame Mrs. Carter for Ms. Vale's disappearance. Screens throughout the courtroom lit up with financial records. Nia recognized some of the documents she'd discovered with Lydia, but now they were accompanied by damning wire transfers and email chains that painted a complete picture of corruption. These records show Mr. Cross created false documentation using Mrs. Carter's digital signatures. Chen continued. He backdated transactions and fabricated security footage to implicate her in Ms. Vale's disappearance. Julian's attorney stood to object, but Julian himself remained eerily still, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. The prosecutor turned to face the gallery. Most critically, Your Honor, we have testimony from Serena Vale herself. A ripple of whispers swept through the courtroom. Nia's heart thundered in her chest as she watched the door open. Serena Vale walked in, escorted by federal marshals. She looked different now, her hair shorter, her designer clothes replaced by a simple blouse and slacks, but her eyes were clear and determined as she took the stand. Ms. Vale, Prosecutor Chen began, please tell the court about your role in exposing Mr. Cross's financial crimes. Serena's voice was steady. I worked in accounts management for one of Mr. Cross's shell companies. When I discovered irregularities in the charity funding, I began gathering evidence. Mr. Cross found out. She paused, glancing at Julian. He threatened me. That's why I approached federal authorities. The night of the gala, I wasn't there for an affair. I was there to pass critical information to an undercover agent. Nia felt tears welling up as pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. All those months of doubt, fear, and confusion dissolved by simple truth. Your Honor, Chen continued, we have substantial evidence that Mr. Cross attempted to silence Ms. Vale and then deliberately framed his wife when his initial plan failed. We are formally dropping all charges against Mrs. Carter and requesting immediate arrest warrants for Julian Cross on multiple federal charges. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Bailiff, take Mr. Cross into custody. Julian stood slowly, his mask of control finally crumbling as federal agents approached. You don't understand, he said, his voice sharp with desperation. I built everything. Everything. You can't just... The click of handcuffs cut off his words. Camera flashes exploded from the media section as Julian Cross, philanthropist, billionaire, manipulator, was led away in custody. Nia sat perfectly still, tears streaming down her face as the judge officially dismissed all charges against her. Eleanor squeezed her hand gently. Truth walks through fire, she whispered, echoing Pastor Ruth's words from months ago. The courtroom slowly emptied, reporters rushing out to file their stories. Nia remained seated, letting the reality wash over her. She thought of her grandmother's Bible, of quiet prayers in dark moments, of faith that had carried her through when evidence pointed the other way. Finally, Eleanor helped her stand. Ready to face the world? Nia nodded, smoothing her simple navy dress. They walked together through the courthouse's marble halls, their footsteps echoing. At the heavy wooden doors, Nia paused, taking a deep breath. Then she stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, free at last. Camera flashes greeted her, but they didn't frighten her anymore. Truth had spoken. Justice had prevailed. And she had survived it all with her dignity intact. Reporters called out questions, but Nia kept walking, her head high. For the first time in months, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer a suspect, no longer a victim, no longer Mrs. Julian Cross. She was simply Nia Carter, stronger, wiser, and finally free. The early morning sunlight streamed through the windows of her grandmother's townhouse, casting warm patterns across the worn hardwood floors. Nia Carter sat at the kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of chamomile tea. The familiar scent reminded her of countless mornings spent here with her grandmother, learning lessons about faith and perseverance that would ultimately save her life. 3 days had passed since she walked down those courthouse steps, finally free from the weight of false accusations. The media frenzy that followed Julian's arrest had been intense, but here in this modest home, surrounded by memories of love and truth, Nia found her sanctuary. She glanced at the morning newspaper on the table but didn't reach for it. Headlines about Julian Cross's crumbling empire filled the front page, accompanied by photos of federal agents carrying boxes from his offices. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now facing decades behind bars. Yet Nia felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a profound sense of relief that truth had prevailed. Aunt Marjorie bustled in from the garden, carrying fresh flowers for the kitchen windowsill. "You're looking better today, child," she said softly, arranging yellow daisies in a simple glass vase. "There's color back in your cheeks." Nia smiled, touching her face absently. "I feel lighter," she admitted, "like I can finally breathe again." The TV in the living room remained dark, though Nia knew every news channel was covering Julian's spectacular fall from grace. Financial crimes spanning continents, witness tampering, conspiracy. The list grew longer each day. But Nia had made a conscious choice not to watch, not to immerse herself in the details of his destruction. That wasn't her story anymore. Instead, she pulled out her grandmother's old writing desk, a simple cherry wood piece that had witnessed countless letters of encouragement over the years. Nia smoothed a clean sheet of paper before her, picked up a pen, and began to write. "Dear Serena, I hope this letter finds you safe and at peace. While I may never know exactly where you are, I wanted to reach out and tell you that I understand. I understand the fear that must have driven you into hiding and the courage it took to finally speak the truth." Nia paused, carefully choosing her next words. The young woman she'd glimpsed that New Year's Eve wasn't just the other woman anymore. She was someone who had been caught in Julian's web of deception and had nearly paid the ultimate price for trying to break free. What happened to both of us was never about love or loyalty. It was about power and control. But in losing everything I thought I needed, I found something much more valuable. My own voice, my own strength, and a deeper faith than I knew I possessed. I hope you found healing in your new life wherever you are, and I want you to know that I forgive you. We were both victims of the same man's manipulation, and holding on to anger would only keep us bound to that past. Tears splashed onto the paper, but these weren't the bitter tears she'd shed in that holding cell, or the desperate ones that had fallen during sleepless nights of uncertainty. These were healing tears, washing away the last traces of hurt and betrayal. From the kitchen, the gentle sounds of Aunt Marjorie humming an old hymn drifted through the house. The familiar melody wrapped around Nia like a warm embrace, reminding her of Sunday mornings and unshakable faith. Most importantly, she continued writing, I want to thank you. Your courage in coming forward to the authorities, even at great personal risk, helped bring truth to light. You chose what was right over what was safe, and that choice helped save us both. Nia set down her pen and looked around the modest room that had become her haven. Her grandmother's Bible sat on the side table, well-worn and filled with decades of margin notes. A quilted throw draped over the back of the sofa, hand-stitched with patience and love. These simple things held more wealth than all the glittering galas and designer clothes she'd left behind. The morning light grew stronger, filling the room with golden warmth. Outside, she could hear children laughing as they walked to school, their joy uncomplicated and pure. Life was moving forward, as it always did. Nia returned to her letter, writing the final lines. I pray you find joy in your new beginning, just as I'm finding in mine. The truth you helped reveal didn't just free me from false accusations. It freed me from the prison of pretense I'd been living in. For that gift of freedom, I will always be grateful. With sincere hopes for your peace and happiness. Nia. She folded the letter carefully, knowing it would reach Serena through the proper channels Eleanor had arranged. The act of writing it had lifted something heavy from her heart, not because she needed Serena to receive her forgiveness, but because Nia needed to release it. Standing by the window, Nia watched as spring buds pushed through the soil in her grandmother's garden. New life emerging from dark places, reaching towards the light. She touched the empty space on her finger where her wedding ring had once been, but there was no more ache there. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Complete freedom. Not the freedom of wealth or status that she'd once thought was important, but the profound freedom that comes from standing in truth, from choosing forgiveness over bitterness, from finding strength in faith rather than fear. The freedom of knowing that her worth wasn't tied to Julian's name or his world of carefully crafted illusions. Aunt Marjorie appeared beside her, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. Your grandmother would be so proud of how you handled all this, she said softly, not with vengeance, but with grace. Nia leaned into her aunt's embrace, grateful for the simple wisdom that had guided her through the darkest days. I finally understand what Grandma meant when she said freedom isn't about getting even, it's about letting go. The morning sun continued to rise, warming her face through the window glass. In its light, Nia saw her path forward clearly, not as Julian Cross's ex-wife, not as a victim of his schemes, but simply as herself. Free to write her own story, one page at a time. The morning sun filtered through the windows of her grandmother's townhouse, casting warm patches of light across the hardwood floors. Nia Carter sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, while spread before her were papers detailing the final plans for the Bell Carter Community Center. The name made her smile every time she read it, a tribute to the woman who had shaped her life with wisdom and unwavering faith. 6 weeks had passed since the courthouse steps, since truth had finally prevailed. The media frenzy around Julian's arrest had eventually died down, leaving Nia with the quiet space she needed to heal and rebuild. She'd spent countless hours in prayer, asking not for direction but for discernment. The answer had come to her one morning as she sorted through her grandmother's old Bible study notes, pages filled with teachings about using hardship as a pathway to help others. The townhouse doorbell chimed, and Nia opened it to find Aunt Marjorie holding a box of old photographs. "Found these while cleaning out the church office?" she said, stepping inside. Thought they might help with the center's opening ceremony. Together, they spread the photos across the kitchen table. There was Belle Carter, young and determined, teaching financial literacy classes in the church basement back in the 1970s. Your grandmother knew that knowledge was power, Aunt Marjorie said softly. But she also knew that power without purpose was just another kind of prison. Nia picked up one particular photo, her grandmother, surrounded by a group of women, all of them smiling despite the clear exhaustion in their eyes. She never turned anyone away, Nia remembered, no matter their story. And neither will you. Aunt Marjorie squeezed her hand. Later that afternoon, Nia stood in what used to be an abandoned community building just 3 blocks from her grandmother's house. The renovations were almost complete. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new computers lined the resource room, and comfortable chairs filled the support group space. The contractor handed her the final inspection papers with a smile. "All up to code, Ms. Carter. You're ready to open?" Nia walked the spaces slowly, remembering how she'd used part of her divorce settlement to fund this project. Money that once represented shame now served a greater purpose. The irony wasn't lost on her. Julian's wealth would now help women protect themselves from men like him. The next morning, as Nia prepared for the center's first day, women began arriving early. Some carried notebooks, others held children's hands, but all wore expressions that Nia recognized: hope mixed with hesitation, strength wrapped in uncertainty. Just like she had felt all those months ago. "Welcome to Bell Carter Center." Nia greeted each one personally. "We're so glad you're here." The first session focused on basic financial literacy, understanding credit scores, recognizing financial abuse, protecting assets. But as the morning progressed, the conversation naturally deepened. One woman shared how her husband had hidden assets during their divorce. Another described discovering her name on loans she'd never approved. Nia listened, offering not just information but understanding. "My story might have made headlines," she said gently, "but that doesn't make it more important than yours. Every woman who stands up for truth is fighting the same battle." During the afternoon session, Pastor Ruth stopped by, her presence as steady as ever. She watched as Nia guided a discussion about maintaining faith through betrayal. "Sometimes," Nia explained to the group, "we think faith means never doubting. But real faith is continuing to trust even when doubts feel overwhelming." The women nodded, some wiping tears. One participant, a young mother named Grace, spoke up. "I was so angry at God when everything fell apart. But sitting here, listening to everyone, I'm starting to think maybe He was protecting me all along." Nia smiled softly. "My grandmother used to say that God doesn't waste our pain. He transforms it into purpose if we let Him." As weeks passed, the center's programs expanded. Volunteer lawyers offered legal guidance. Financial advisors taught investment basics. But more importantly, women found community. They shared resources, watched each other's children, celebrated small victories together. One evening, as Nia locked up after a particularly powerful support group session, she found Lydia Monroe waiting outside. The accountant who had helped uncover Julian's schemes now volunteered her expertise at the center. "You've created something beautiful here," Lydia observed, gesturing to the building. "Something genuine." Nia paused, keys in hand. "I just wanted to give them what I needed most during my darkest days, a safe place to tell the truth. And find their strength," Lydia added. Inside her grandmother's townhouse that night, Nia sat in the familiar kitchen, adding notes to tomorrow's lesson plans. A framed photo of Belle Carter watched over her from the wall, her grandmother's smile as warm and encouraging as ever. The next morning, the center buzzed with activity. Women gathered in small groups, sharing stories and strategies. Nia moved between them, offering guidance where needed, but mostly watching as they lifted each other up. The sound of their voices, strong, determined, healing, filled the space with hope. During the closing session, a woman who had attended since day one stood up to share. "6 weeks ago I came here broken," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I thought I was alone. But in this room I found my courage again. We all did." The room erupted in applause, not the kind that celebrated fame or success, but the kind that acknowledged shared strength and restored dignity. Nia stood quietly, watching these beautiful, resilient women support each other. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about something far greater, the power of truth spoken in love, of faith lived out in action, of purpose born from pain. In that moment, surrounded by the sound of healing and hope, Nia felt her grandmother's presence strongly. She could almost hear her voice. "See, child, God always makes a way for truth to shine." As snowflakes danced through the crisp December air, Nia Carter stood on the steps of the Belle Carter Community Center, watching people gather with candles in their hands. The soft glow of street lamps caught the crystalline flakes, making them shimmer like tiny stars falling to earth. This New Year's Eve felt worlds apart from the last. No designer gown, no crystal chandeliers, no cameras flashing. Instead, she wore a warm wool coat and comfortable boots, and the only lights were the gentle flames of dozens of candles held by the community members who had become her extended family. "Ms. Carter," called out Maria, a young mother who had recently completed the center's financial literacy program. "We saved a spot for you right up front." She gestured to the circle forming in the courtyard, where familiar faces smiled in welcome. Nia descended the steps carefully, accepting a candle from Pastor Ruth, who had become a regular presence at the center's weekly support groups. The elderly woman's eyes twinkled with knowing pride as she squeezed Nia's hand. "Look at what God has done with your pain," she whispered. Indeed, the scene before her was living testimony to transformation. There was Sarah, who had escaped financial abuse and now volunteered as a peer counselor. Besides her stood Marcus, an accountant who offered pro bono services to women rebuilding their lives. Even Eleanor Whitfield, the retired judge who had helped clear Nia's name, attended regularly to provide legal guidance and mentorship. The courtyard filled with quiet conversation and occasional laughter, a stark contrast to the artificial gaiety of last year's gala. Nia breathed in the cold air, letting memories of that night wash over her without the sting they once carried. The betrayal she witnessed in that private lounge had shattered her world, but like a broken vessel repaired with gold, the mending had made her stronger, more beautiful in its imperfection. 10 minutes to midnight, Aunt Marjorie announced, coming to stand beside her niece. She wrapped an arm around Nia's shoulders. "Your grandmother would be so proud, baby girl. Not just of what you've built here, but of how you built it, with grace and forgiveness." Nia nodded, thinking of the letter she'd written to Serena months ago. She never expected a response, but writing it had freed something inside her. "I learned that from Belle," she said softly. "She always said that bitterness makes a poor foundation, but truth and mercy can support any weight." The crowd began to gather closer as midnight approached. Someone started singing an old hymn, and others joined in, their voices rising clear and strong into the night sky. Nia looked at the faces illuminated by candlelight, people from all walks of life, bound together by shared experiences and mutual support. These were not the powerful elite who had populated Julian's world, but they possessed something far more valuable: authentic hearts and genuine spirits. In their stories of survival and resilience, Nia had found her true purpose. The community center wasn't just a building, it was a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of truth over deception, of light over darkness. As the final minute of the year ticked away, Nia lifted her candle higher. Around her, others did the same, creating a circle of light that seemed to push back the winter darkness. The snow continued to fall silently, each flake catching the glow of their flames before settling on shoulders and scarves. 10. The crowd began to count. 9, 8. Nia closed her eyes briefly, offering a prayer of gratitude. The fear that had gripped her through months of false accusations and public shame had melted away, replaced by a deep, unshakable peace. 7, 6, 5. She thought of the women who would come through these doors in the coming year, carrying their own burdens of betrayal and loss. The center would be ready to receive them, to help them find their way back to wholeness. 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! The cry went up as midnight struck, but it wasn't accompanied by explosive fireworks or popping champagne corks. Instead, the candles blazed, brighter as people hugged and blessed one another, their joy authentic and unforced. Nia stood in the midst of it all, snow gathering on her shoulders like a gentle benediction. She felt no need to wish for anything as the new year began. Everything she needed was right here. The fire of betrayal that had threatened to destroy her had instead refined her, burning away false securities and revealing the pure gold of her character. As the group began to sing Auld Lang Syne, Nia's smile deepened with the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not in a glittering ballroom pretending at happiness, but here on this snowy street, surrounded by real people with real hearts, holding a light that would help others find their way home. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.